There are places where science ends and darkness begins, where reality fractures and nightmares breathe. These are the tales of Carl Otto's dark anthology.
The Abernathy Files, Episode 5, Echoes from the Den, by Carl Otto. Nancy lay sprawled at the bottom of the moss-choked pit, her breath coming in ragged clouds as the cold bit into her skin. Her ribs ached from the fall, but it wasn't the pain that froze her. It was the things surrounding her. The silence in the pit was unnatural, smothering. Around her, jagged roots curled like claws from the earth, and tangled among them were bones, some animal, some terrifyingly human. The growls began again, low and layered, echoing from every direction. From the dark corners of the pit, shapes emerged. They were wolves, or had been once. Now they were something else entirely. Their bodies were ruined, skeletal things stitched from bone and sinew, their fur long rotted away. Shadow clung to them like a second skin, pouring from their jaws and ribs, forming muscles where flesh should be. Their empty sockets glowed with pale blue-white light, like distant stars burning with cold hunger. Nancy's hands trembled as she tried to sit up. The wolves didn't charge. They circled, watching, waiting. Then the mist thickened, rolling into the pit like smoke from some ancient fire, and her vision twisted. Suddenly, she was 8 years old again, standing on the linoleum floor of a too-bright hospital. Her mother, in her nurse's uniform, stethoscope hanging forgotten around her neck, stood across the lobby, purse over one shoulder, her eyes fixed somewhere just past Nancy. "Stay quiet. I'm on shift. Don't touch anything. Don't make a mess." The words were like ghostly echoes, but they hit Nancy with the weight of memory. She remembered waiting alone in the back hallway of the hospital, playing with tongue depressors and scribbling with stolen pens, hoping her mother might look back. She never did. And now, as Nancy stared, the mist twisted again, and her mother's eyes flared yellow, her lips pulling back to reveal sharp, glistening teeth. The nurse's uniform split like paper as fur burst through, limbs lengthening. A wolf now stood in her place, its fur matted, its glare accusing. A new vision unfurled. She was 10, seated in an oversized desk at school, while muffled voices echoed behind the classroom door. Her teacher and the principal whispered about her temper, her isolation, her trouble adjusting. The door cracked open just enough for their faces to turn, and as they looked directly at her, their mouths stretched into snarls. Their skin fell away in strips, revealing grinning bone and black fog beneath. More wolves slinked forward. Nancy flinched. Another figure stepped forward from the fog. Her father, tall, stern. He wore the scowl he always saved for her. In this vision, it was the night he'd come home from her 6th grade parent-teacher conference. He held her crumpled report card in his hand. "C in math," he muttered. "A waste of your mother's sacrifice." Nancy sat on the couch, back straight, hands folded, as if perfect posture could earn forgiveness. But it never did, and just like her mother, his face began to ripple. His mouth split wide, his arms stretched unnaturally. Another wolf emerged, sleek, powerful, and cold. Nancy tried to crawl back, but the pit walls offered no escape. A fourth shape approached. It moved slower than the others, heavier. Nancy knew it before the mist cleared. The funeral home, the stale perfume, the suffocating hush of a crowd pretending grief. She was 16 again, standing beside the casket, her mother inside, her father beside her, not comforting, never comforting. "She wouldn't have died if it wasn't for you," The words weren't shouted. They were whispered, but they carried more force than any blow. Nancy didn't understand them then. She still didn't. But in this place, they stuck in her chest like a knife. As her father turned toward her, his features crumbled and reformed, and another wolf stepped forward. This one older, its muzzle scarred, its growl filled with ancient judgment. Surrounded, Nancy clutched at the dirt, her breath short and frantic. The wolves circled closer, not with speed, but with slow inevitability. The mist clung to her skin, thick and suffocating. Her past had come alive around her, not as memories, but as monsters, and there was nowhere to run. Then, a voice, sharp, real, Peggy's voice. "Nancy, look at me." A beam of light sliced through the fog, and a figure appeared at the edge of the pit, mud-smeared, wild-eyed, revolver in one hand, flashlight in the other. "Grab a hold of me." Nancy didn't move, couldn't. The wolves were too close now, pressing into the space between vision and flesh. Peggy didn't wait. She dropped the flashlight, slid down the wall, and reached Nancy, yanking her out of the circle of bones with a strength born of pure, furious defiance. She wrapped one arm around Nancy's waist and half-dragged, half-climbed back up the pit wall, slipping but always continuing as roots tore at her coat. They hit the surface with a gasp. Nancy collapsed against her, shaking. Her hands clawed at Peggy's coat like she might fall back into the earth if she let go. Peggy held her close, voice low and fierce, one hand cradling the back of Nancy's head, the other gripping her shoulder like she was anchoring her to the world. "You're okay," she whispered. "You're out. You're safe now. I've got you." Nancy shuddered against her, eyes wide. "But we need to go. Now. Those things are still coming." "I swear," Peggy growled, "if any undead wolf even breathes in your direction, I'll plant a boot up its hollow ass." A broken laugh escaped Nancy's throat, half hysterical, half grateful. Peggy slipped an arm around her. "We run together. You fall. I pick you up. You panic. I slap you out of it. You see another vision. You scream, and I shoot it until it runs away. Got it?" Nancy nodded shakily. "Got it." "Good." Peggy adjusted her grip on the revolver and glanced down the deer path. The mist hadn't thickened yet, but the cold was rising again. "Let's get the hell out of this nightmare." Peggy and Nancy crashed through the underbrush, branches slashing at their arms, breath ragged in the freezing night air. Behind them, the forest pulsed with growls and movement, not the chaotic rush of predators in chase, but the patient, inevitable advance of something that knew it would catch them. Their boots hit gravel. The sudden change in terrain shocked Peggy's legs. They staggered out of the tree line and onto a narrow, unlit stretch of county road, their shadows spilling long in the moonlight. "Keep moving," Peggy barked, hauling Nancy forward. Nancy looked back. Her scream caught in her throat. The wolves had reached the edge of the trees and stopped. A dozen shapes emerged from the woods, bone and shadow braided into monstrous forms. Their hollow eyes burned with blue-white fire as they gathered along the tree line, silent and waiting, like judgment made flesh. None stepped forward. Peggy slowed, heart thundering, watching them. "Why aren't they crossing?" The wolves growled, low and layered, like a language half-remembered. One raised its snout, testing the air. Nancy turned, pointing. "Look." Just to the right of the road, half buried in vines and rust, a crooked metal sign jutted from the weeds. "Welcome to Millbrook." A bullet hole pierced one of the O's. The whole thing leaned like it was trying to collapse. "They're not just waiting," Peggy said. "They're deciding." And then one of the wolves stepped forward. The moment shattered. More followed, shadow trailing from their paws as they crossed onto the pavement. Headlights exploded over the hill. Peggy barely had time to shove Nancy aside as a pickup truck barreled around the bend, its tires screeching in protest. The driver saw the wolves too late. The impact was sickening. Two of the nearest wolves went flying, bone and mist scattering across the asphalt. The truck swerved, tires blowing as it crashed into a ditch with a metallic crunch. The engine hissed but didn't die. The driver stumbled out, a middle-aged man in flannel, dazed and bleeding from the forehead. "Jesus Christ," he gasped. "What the hell was that?" "Run," Peggy screamed. "You have to run." But it was too late. The remaining wolves were already circling. The two the truck had hit began to reform on the road, bones snapping into place, shadows knitting flesh. Nancy snatched the revolver from Peggy's coat pocket and fired. The nearest wolf's skull burst apart, but the creature didn't fall. It just staggered, then began to pull itself back together, blue light sparking from the cracks in its skull. "I'm out," Nancy cried, fumbling with the empty weapon. The man screamed as the wolves closed in. Peggy grabbed Nancy's wrist, yanking her away. "We can't save him. We have to go." But now. The last thing Nancy saw as they vanished into the woods again was the wolves surrounding the man, their shadows swallowing him whole. They continued through the countryside, branches slashing, frost crunching beneath their boots, breath ripping from their lungs like smoke. Behind them, the road was silent. The man's screams had stopped. Peggy didn't slow until the trees grew familiar, until Millbrook's distant streetlights shimmered through the branches like stars barely holding back the dark. Nancy stumbled beside her, eyes hollow, lips bloodless. Neither of them spoke, because they both knew a line had been crossed. Millbrook wasn't the quiet town they'd always thought. The Abernathy house was still, but the living room light was on. It had that feel that only came when people were wide awake and waiting. Despite Peggy's best efforts, the back door creaked when she crept through it, her boots caked in mud, coat torn and hands trembling. The screen door snapped shut behind her like a gunshot. "Margaret Ann Abernathy." Her mother's voice cut through the silence like a whip. A light clicked on in the hallway, illuminating her father in his robe, his face twisted in a storm of anger and worry. Her mother appeared behind him, arms crossed, hair in curlers. "Where the hell have you been?" her father demanded, stepping forward. "Do you know what time it is? It's nearly 1 a.m. "You didn't leave a note. You didn't call," her mother added sharply. "We were about to call the police." Peggy winced, not just at their words, but at how ragged she knew she must look. Her hair was wild, face streaked with dirt, and her jacket was scuffed and torn at the sleeve. I went for a walk," Peggy said, reaching for the simplest lie that might still sound reasonable. "I needed some air. I lost track of time." Her father's eyes narrowed. "You expect us to believe that? You come stumbling in here looking like you've been in a bar fight, and you want us to believe you went for a walk?" "I was walking in the woods," Peggy muttered, brushing past them toward the stairs. "I got turned around. Then I fell. I'm fine, just tired." "You are not fine," her mother snapped. "Something is going on with you, and we are not stupid. You've been acting strange for weeks now, since Halloween. You disappear at all hours, you come back looking like this, and now you won't even tell us the truth." Peggy's chest tightened. The lies tasted bitter, and guilt burned coldly beneath her skin. "I'm just tired," she repeated softly. "Can we do this in the morning? Please." Her parents stared at her. The hallway light hummed in the silence. Her mother opened her mouth again, but her father raised a hand. "Go to bed. But tomorrow, we're talking. All of this. No more running around at all hours. No more secrets." Peggy nodded mutely, already halfway up the stairs. Her legs trembled with each step, and when she finally reached her room and closed the door, she pressed her forehead against it, exhaling a breath that shook. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the glass in the window panes. She crossed to her desk and turned on the lamp, its soft yellow glow pooling over the ancient book that waited there, the one the old woman had given her. The cover was worn, its corners cracked. The sigils on the spine pulsed faintly. Or maybe that was just her eyes playing tricks in the low light. She didn't open it. Instead, she sat on the edge of her bed, coat still on, eyes fixed on a shadow in the corner. What was she going to tell them? The next morning, light crept through Peggy's curtains in gray, reluctant streaks. Her body ached like it had been dragged through gravel, and in a way, it had. She lay still, eyes tracing the cracks in the ceiling. The silence in the house wasn't peaceful. It was loaded like the pause before a trap is sprung. Downstairs, she heard movement. No clinking dishes, no music, just low voices and the occasional sharp word. They were talking about her. She sat up slowly, every joint resisting. Her coat still lay in a crumpled heap on the chair, mud flaking from its hem. Her boots sat by the door like evidence waiting to be bagged. She dressed quickly. Jeans, jacket, a clean shirt that didn't look suspicious. She slipped across the floor, avoiding the third step. It always groaned. In the kitchen, a bowl of oatmeal sat untouched on the table. A passive-aggressive olive branch. Or a trap. She ignored it. At the back door, she hesitated, then scribbled a note. Went to the library. Be back by lunch. Just plausible enough. She slipped out. The cold hit like a slap, sharper in daylight, more alert. Frost still clung to the grass. Her breath came in tight clouds. Nancy was already waiting by the old train bridge, arms folded, knit cap pulled low. She looked tired, haunted but whole. When she saw Peggy, she gave a tight smile that didn't seem sincere. "You okay?" Nancy asked. "No," Peggy said honestly. "You?" "Nope," Nancy said. "But I'm here." They didn't hug. They didn't need to. Just walking side by side was enough. They both understood that some things follow you after a night like that. Things you can't name, can't shake. Peggy glanced over. "I need to show you something. Everything. I should have done it sooner." Nancy raised an eyebrow. "Is this where you drag me to your secret hideout and tell me the town's full of demons?" "Yeah," Peggy said. "Basically." Nancy sighed and started walking. "Okay, lead the way." The alley behind Garrett's bookshop was quiet, choked with frost and the musty scent of wet leaves. Peggy crouched beside the old milk crate she kept stashed behind the dumpster, wiping her palm against her jeans before gripping the edge of the window. "This," Nancy whispered, glancing around, "feels like the part in a horror movie where the audience starts yelling at the screen." "Yeah, well," Peggy grunted, hoisting the window open. "The audience doesn't usually have to deal with undead shadow wolves." She climbed through first, boots scraping against the shelf beneath the window. Once inside, she reached back through the opening. "Come on." Nancy hesitated, eyeing the window like it might bite her. "You said you wanted answers," Peggy added. Nancy sighed and climbed in. nearly knocking over a stack of outdated astrology manuals. Peggy steadied her. "Classy," Nancy muttered. "So this is your secret lair?" "No," Peggy said, flicking on her flashlight. "That's downstairs." Nancy blinked. "There's a basement?" "Yep, hidden one, behind the history section." "Of course there is." The building groaned as they moved. Above them, the shop's main floor sat silent, still shuttered, still technically closed, since Mr. Garrett had disappeared, but the air didn't feel empty. Nancy slowed. "You've been coming in here a lot, haven't you?" "Yeah," Peggy said. "Last couple of weeks." Nancy stopped walking. "Peg, why didn't you tell me sooner?" Peggy didn't answer. She just pulled aside a moldy curtain, revealing a trap door. She flipped the switch. A low golden light flickered on below, illuminating a narrow staircase of warped brick and groaning wood. "Look," Peggy said. "I didn't think you were ready." Nancy gave a bitter laugh. "Ready? For what?" They reached the bottom step. The air shifted. The candles lit themselves, and the shadows moved. Nancy froze, hand gripping the banister. "Did you do that?" "Nope," Peggy said, calm but tense. The basement smelled of earth and old paper. Along the stone walls, dozens of candles burned with unnatural stillness. The space stretched wider than it should have, arched ceilings, crooked alcoves, chalk lines on the floor, worn sigils, ritual circles long faded. Something stirred at the far end of the room, a shadow too thick for candlelight. It reformed into the outline of a man, or the memory of one. His form flickered like a reel of old film caught between frames. His face was obscured, but the air bent around him with weight. Nancy stepped back. "Peggy, what the hell is that?" "The Guardian," Peggy whispered. "He shows up every time I come down here." The spirit's voice rumbled from nowhere and everywhere at once. "You should not be here." Nancy flinched. Peggy stepped forward. "She's with me. She has a right to know." The air thickened. The candles dimmed. "I have warned you once," the voice said. "This path is not meant for you." "And I told you," Peggy said sharply. "I'm doing this." She raised her chin and recited the phrase Mr. Garrett had given her. "In the silence where shadows dwell, bind the light to break the spell." Silence fell like a hammer. The ghost didn't move, then suddenly it did. Not forward, but closer. One blink, and it was just inches from Peggy, towering and massive, made of memory, force, and fury. "Blood will answer for what has been stirred," it hissed, "and blood will pay the price." Nancy gasped. Peggy's jaw clenched. "Then it'll be my blood, not hers." For a moment, nothing. Then the ghost flickered, cracked, just slightly. The voice returned, softer, tired. "You should have stayed away." "I know," Peggy said, "but something's coming, and you know it." The weight in the air shifted, and then, just like that, the spirit was gone. The candles burned steady once more. Nancy stared at the empty space where the ghost had vanished. Her voice came low, dry. "Okay, you've got maybe 10 seconds to explain before I start screaming or crying. Possibly both." Peggy didn't flinch. She reached for a battered notebook on a nearby crate and handed it over. The pages were filled with ink, clippings, diagrams, chaos that somehow formed a map. "This town," Peggy said quietly, "is wrong. Not just haunted, cursed. There's something underneath it, Always has been. Something rotten. And someone always had to keep it in check. Nancy flipped through the pages. Symbols like teeth. Places marked in red. Old names. Burned edges. Like a monster hunter thing? She asked. More like janitor of the supernatural. I think Garrett was part of a cult that summoned the fog back on Halloween before he vanished. I think he was trying to make it right. I think he wanted me to finish what he started. Nancy gave a humorless chuckle. Figures. You always did have a thing for weird books. Yeah, well, this one bites back. Peggy moved to a nearby candle and watched the flame flicker. Since Halloween, it's been getting worse. Shadows moving the wrong way. The fog that took people. Took Tom. Her voice caught in her throat. Nancy hugged the notebook. They knew me, or pretended to, like they were made of my memories. Peggy nodded. They are. I think they're built from trauma, regret, fear. They twist what's already inside you. Nancy stared at the chalk-lined floor. And that ghost? Peggy shook her head. I don't know who he is. Garrett said he was a guardian spirit. But he doesn't like me being here. Hates it, actually. But I say that phrase, and he backs off. Nancy looked at the dark far wall. He didn't seem evil. No, just old, worn down, like he's waiting for something. Nancy exhaled. Okay, if we're really going demon hunting, I'm going to need a stiff drink. Peggy pointed to a dusty shelf. Luckily, there's a wine rack. Nancy stared. Of course there is. She pulled a bottle with a smudged label. This looks older than your basement. Perfect, Peggy muttered. We'll toast if we survive. Nancy plopped down beside her, flipping open a dusty volume. So, what now? Peggy pulled out the Polaroids they took the night before. Photos of the carved stone deep in the woods. We figure out what this is. The wolves came from that place. Whatever binds them is tied to it. They worked in silence, pages rustling, ink smudging. Outside, the wind howled, or maybe it didn't. Several hours and half a bottle of wine later. I think I found something, Peggy said, tapping a page. Nancy leaned in. There's a ritual, a severing spell. Old, fragmented. It's meant to break the bond between fear demons and the vessels they ride. But the reversal chant, it's not in English. She looked up. But it's the best shot we've got. Nancy closed her book with a snap. Let's do it. Peggy arched an eyebrow. No sarcasm? I'm too tired, and I'd like to sleep without ghost wolves licking my trauma. Peggy smirked. Fair. Her finger drifted to the bottom of the page. Just below the chant was a faded line. Something must be given. She didn't read it out loud. Instead, Peggy glanced at the clock. Her stomach twisted. Shit. I told my parents I'd be back by lunch. Nancy paused. That's not ideal. They're already suspicious, Peggy muttered. If I don't show up soon, it's going to be a full meltdown. Police, grounding, apocalypse. Nancy frowned for half a second. Then her eyes lit up. Wait, we've got Mr. Garrett's stash, the cash box from the back room, right? The one with the bonds and cash and everything? Peggy blinked. Yeah. Why? No one knows Garrett is missing yet. As far as your parents are concerned, you got a job. Quiet hours, inventory, archiving, whatever sounds old and boring enough that they won't ask questions. Peggy stared at her. You think they'll buy that? It's Millbrook, Nancy said, standing up. Everyone probably thinks Garrett is just on one of his weird antique buying road trips. He always kept to himself. And if you walk in with dust on your jacket and a story about helping the old man organize his old books and tax receipts. Sounds boring, sounds real. Peggy exhaled. God, I love your brain. Nancy smirked. You're welcome. Now go lie to your parents so we can go banish some nightmare wolves later. Peggy grabbed her coat. On it. Nancy nodded, already gathering the books. I'll keep digging. If anything starts glowing or growling, I'll scream. Deal. Peggy hesitated at the basement stairs, then turned back. Thanks for covering for me. Don't get all sentimental, Nancy said. Just make it convincing. The afternoon passed in uneasy silence. Peggy didn't linger at home. She scrubbed away the dirt just enough to look believable and delivered the carefully practiced lines about archival duties and sorting through Mr. Garrett's special filing system. Every word felt bitter, like swallowing something sharp. Her mother's eyes narrowed, skeptical and searching, and her father's silence cut deeper than outright disbelief ever could. It wasn't just that she hated lying. It was that the lies worked. They nodded slowly, cautious relief overriding suspicion, accepting the half-truth because it was safer than confronting the alternative. Peggy left before their fragile acceptance could shatter, guilt twisting cold in her gut. But for now, they believed her. The back window creaked open just after sunset. Peggy slid through, landing with a thud that rattled a stack of books. Her coat was different, cleaner, but her face still carried the weight of the day. She clutched the Latin dictionary under one arm and exhaled a slow breath as the cold followed her in. Nancy, she called softly. A muffled, "Back here," echoed from the basement stairwell. Peggy followed the candlelight, her boots tapping a steady rhythm across the warped floorboards. The air in the basement felt heavier than before, like the shadows were leaning in. Nancy sat cross-legged on the stone floor, surrounded by open books, notes, and a new uncorked bottle of wine. You look alive, she said. Barely. Peggy held up the dictionary like a sword. But I got it, and I think we're ready. Nancy stood, brushing off her knees. Good, because I'm getting restless. Peggy nodded. Then let's not wait. They moved quickly, gathering what they needed. Salt from the ritual shelf, a cracked bottle of iron filings, the parchment filled with arcane symbols into Nancy's coat. Peggy added the notebook and the Latin dictionary to her bag, then paused, her fingers brushing the page with the phonetically spelled incantation. Got everything? Nancy asked, slinging her flashlight over one shoulder. Yeah, Peggy said, quieter now. Let's finish this. They slipped out the back, boots crunching over frost-bitten leaves. The town behind them felt distant, too normal, too unaware. Their breath fogged the air in thick clouds as they moved into the woods, retracing steps neither of them wanted to remember. The deeper they went, the quieter it got. No birds, no wind, just the sound of cold earth and two hearts beating too fast. The stone rose like a jagged tooth from the frozen earth, ringed in mist that never moved quite right. Peggy knelt beside it, her fingers numb as she poured a careful circle of salt. The burned ritual page crackled in the wind beside her. The sigils carved into the stone pulsed faintly, hungry. Nancy glanced toward the trees. They're close. I can feel it. Peggy pulled out her notebook and flipped to the marked page. The chant was there, scrawled phonetically beneath the Latin. Nancy had the iron filings and parchment covered in copied symbols clutched tightly in her hands. Peggy looked at Nancy, held her gaze, nodded once. Then she began. The chant cut through the forest like a blade, The wind died. Even the stars seemed to pause. From the trees, the wolves emerged. More than before, their shapes were broken, stitched, mist and bone twisted into something other than natural. Their eyes glowed like dying stars. They didn't charge. Not yet. They watched. Nancy threw her arcane sketches into the circle. It flared, sputtering violet and blue. Peggy's voice grew louder, stronger. The stone began to hum. The forest tensed like a held breath. Then something shifted. The shadows thickened. The world tilted. And Tom stepped out of the mist. Not the Tom she remembered. Not exactly. His eyes were the same shape, same color, but glassy, empty. Hollow reflections of a boy who used to laugh in the summer rain, who held her hand under tables when no one else was looking. His flannel shirt clung to him like it had soaked in fog or regret. His lips trembled, twisted, struggling around a smile he no longer knew how to form. He reached out, fingers trembling, palm up, like asking her to dance again, like promising forever the way only the young ever could. Peg, you left me. Peggy froze. The chant faltered, dying in her throat. She was back in that final moment, the fog wrapping around him like pale hands, Tom turning back just for a heartbeat, eyes wide, frightened, pleading. She'd reached out then, her fingertips grazing his sleeve, a fraction of an inch too short, a heartbeat too late. He'd vanished into the mist, swallowed whole, and here he was again, still standing just out of reach, not quite gone, not quite back, just trapped. I waited, he whispered, voice cracking like dried leaves, eyes wet with tears that didn't belong in a ghost's gaze. I was scared. I kept calling, Peg. You didn't come. Something shattered in her chest, sharp as glass and cold as frostbite. She gasped, feeling the world tear itself open inside her. Then silence. It wasn't a scream of grief or a sob of loss. It was emptiness, instant and total, like someone had reached into her soul, found every warm memory of Tom, every hidden smile, every whispered secret beneath the stars, and pulled them out by the roots. She stared at him, recognizing every detail of the face she'd loved, every feature exactly as she remembered. But now, he was nothing more than a stranger, a faded photograph, a word she no longer understood. I'm sorry, she whispered, but the words were empty, meaningless. She remembered loving him, but the love itself was gone. Nancy shouted something. It sounded like her name, but it was muffled, underwater. The wolves stepped forward. Peggy dropped to her knees, eyes wide, mouth moving, but silent. The chant was forgotten. Nancy didn't hesitate. She dove for the notebook, snatched it from the frost-covered dirt, and flipped to the page. Her voice cracked on the first syllable, stumbled through the second. But she kept going. Her breath fogged the air, lips chapped and trembling as she forced each word out like it weighed 100 pounds. The stone screamed. Light burst from its cracks. Not bright, but wrong. Like color peeled from sound. The wolves shrieked in unison, echoes of every fear they were ever built from. Black fog erupted from their joints, bone rattling as their forms came undone. One by one they dissolved, until only silence remained. Peggy sat motionless, eyes blank. Nancy dropped beside her, grabbing her shoulders. Peggy, come on, say something. Peggy blinked, then again. She looked at Nancy. Did it work? Nancy nodded. They're gone. You're okay. Peggy looked down at the notebook in Nancy's lap. You finished it. You left it written phonetically. I just read it. Peggy smiled, faint but hollow. I saw him. Nancy didn't ask who. She just helped her up, quiet and careful, like Peggy might crack too if she moved too fast. The stone lay broken into jagged shards, faintly smoking where the cracks still glowed. Nancy knelt beside it, carefully gathering the fragments into her coat pockets. What are you doing? Peggy murmured. Taking them back, Nancy said softly. We'll store them at the bookstore, safe, just in case. Peggy nodded slowly. The mist had thinned, retreating into the trees. The wolves' den lay empty now, silent, its power spent. But they both knew better than to trust silence. Nancy adjusted her coat, now heavy with pieces of their shattered nightmare. We should go before your folks send up a search party. Peggy nodded again, but she didn't look back. There was nothing left here for her now. As they walked through the trees, frost crackled beneath their feet like broken bones. Nancy glanced sideways. The worst is over? Peggy didn't answer, because she still remembered Tom's name, his face, the way his hand felt in hers. But she didn't miss him, and that hurt more than anything else.
Thank you so much for joining me for this chilling chapter of the Abernathy Files, Echoes from the Den. If you enjoyed getting lost in Millbrook's shadows, remember to hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell. Because trust me, you don't want to miss what's lurking around the next corner. Before you go, let's stir the pot a little. What do you think Peggy's greatest fear really is? Would you have risked lying to your parents if you were in her shoes? And those visions, do you think the wolves showed Nancy the truth, or twisted lies she already believed? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I can't wait to dive into your theories. Come back next week for more spine-tingling secrets, haunting mysteries, and the kind of darkness that stays with you long after the story ends. Until then, keep your doors locked and your flashlights ready. See you soon.